The war began without warning. Ships tore through the skies of Veralia, a world known for its brutal beasts and harsher warriors. The people had faced countless invaders before, but never had they seen anything as strange as the small, pale figures stepping off those metal crafts. They were humans, a species the galaxy whispered about with a mix of disbelief and mockery. They looked too fragile to survive in the death world that Veralia had always been. Zira, the commander of the Beast Legions, stood on the blackened cliffs above the battlefield. Her war beast, Cathor, a creature of fire and iron scales, shifted restlessly beside her. His eyes burned like molten rock, his every breath releasing smoke into the air. Zira's emerald skin glistened under the ash-filled wind, her armor heavy with the scars of 100 battles. She watched the humans march forward in strange formation, weapons glinting under the pale sun. They looked light, quick to fall, bones ready to break. She laughed at the thought of them surviving even one clash. Against her warriors, Cathor rumbled deep in his chest as if sharing her amusement. He had crushed war machines twice his size and ripped apart the armored elites of rival empires. No prey had ever escaped his claws. The idea that these soft-skinned strangers could even scratch him seemed ridiculous. Zira tightened her grip on his horn, feeling the heat radiating from his body. She would enjoy watching them fail. She would enjoy watching their courage turn to terror. The first wave began with a deafening roar from the Beast Legions. Massive reptilian mounts thundered forward, their riders armed with blades forged in volcanic fire. Zira gave the signal, and Cathor leapt down the slope, each impact of his clawed feet cracking the rock beneath. Dust and embers swirled in the air. The humans did not run. Instead, they moved with calculated precision, their weapons flashing in strange arcs. The air shimmered with the sound of their fire, but Zira saw no fear in their faces. That unsettled her for a moment, though she dismissed it quickly. She commanded Cathor to crush their leader. The beast surged forward, mouth opening in a blast of heat and smoke. But then something unexpected happened. A single human stepped out from the formation, his armor a dull, scratched silver, his face calm. He held no massive cannon or alien tech. Blade, just a simple metal weapon, short and sharp. Zira nearly laughed again. Until he moved. The human closed the distance between himself and Cathor, faster than she thought possible. He didn't dodge the beast's claws, he intercepted them. The impact should have shattered his bones. Instead, Cathor's massive arm faltered, forced back with a strength that should not have been possible. Zira's eyes widened as the human slid under the beast's guard, his blade cutting deep into a joint between the scales. Cathor roared in pain, molten blood spraying across the scorched ground. The surrounding legion riders shouted in shock. They had seen many things in war, but nothing like this. The human didn't retreat. He pressed forward, each strike aimed with precision, each movement efficient and powerful. Zira could feel Cathor's rage building, his body glowing brighter as he summoned more heat. But even then, the human did not falter. His muscles strained, his expression unshaken, his will unbroken. Every clash of steel against scale echoed with a truth Zira didn't want to believe. This was not the strength of a fragile creature. For the first time in years, Zira felt something unfamiliar in her chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pride. It was the faint sting of fear. She realized that if this one human could push Cathor back, the rest of their kind might not be as weak as she had believed. She didn't take her eyes off him, not even as her other warriors tried to surround him. He fought like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. And in that moment, Zira understood that the war she thought she had already won had only just begun. Asterisk, the battlefield was chaos. Ash and smoke twisted into the air, and the roar of beasts mixed with the sharp crack of human weapons. Zira moved down the slope, her boots sinking into the scorched earth. Her eyes never left the human who had dared to challenge Cathor. Around him, her soldiers fought fiercely, but their usual advantage seemed to vanish in the face of his relentless strikes. Every motion he made was precise, not wasted, as though each step was part of a plan she could not yet see. Cathor snarled and lunged again, his massive claws tearing at the ground. The human sidestepped with impossible speed, his blade cutting another deep line into the beast's armored hide. Molten blood hissed as it hit the dirt, filling the air with the smell of burning metal. Zira felt Cathor's pain through the beast link they shared, but she also felt something else, frustration. The war beast, undefeated for years, was beginning to realize that his enemy could not be broken so easily. The other human soldiers fought with equal discipline. They did not charge recklessly or scatter in fear when faced with the monstrous mounts. They moved together, covering each other's backs, their smaller weapons finding weak points in the armor of Zira's warriors. It was nothing like the panicked scrambling she had expected. These were not prey. These were predators in their own right, and they fought with a kind of unity she had rarely seen outside of her own legion. Zira raised her hand, signaling her second wave forward. Larger beasts, plated in steel and armed with flame lances, stormed into the fight. She intended to overwhelm the humans with sheer force and number. The ground shook under the charge, the sky glowing orange from the fire. Yet even then, the humans did not break formation. They shifted their lines, absorbing the impact and striking back with unnerving precision. It was as if they had trained for this exact kind of battle on a world just as hostile as Veralia. She leapt onto Cathor's back, gripping the ridged scales for balance. If her beast could not bring down the human alone, then she would guide his fury herself. She ordered Cathor to crush him under his full weight. The beast reared back, shadowing the man in darkness before slamming down with a force that split the ground. But when the dust cleared, the human still stood, shield raised, legs braced. He had stopped the strike. His boots dug deep furrows into the earth, but he did not fall. Zira felt her breath catch. No one should have been able to withstand that. She studied him closely now. His armor was worn, scratched from countless fights, but it was not advanced enough to explain such strength. His face was calm, almost too calm for the madness around them. His eyes locked with hers, and in that instant, she saw not fear or rage, but a challenge. It was as though he was telling her without words that this fight was far from over. The human pushed upward, forcing Cathor back a step. A single step, yet it felt like a victory Zira had never imagined an outsider achieving. She drove her beast into another attack, slashing at the man with a long serrated spear. He met the strike with a twist of his shield, the blow glancing off and leaving her momentarily unbalanced. That was when he struck, his blade flashing toward her mount's exposed flank. Cathor roared, the wound deep enough to stagger him. Sideways, for a brief moment, the noise of battle around them seemed distant. Zira tightened her grip, refusing to yield. She had faced warlords, assassins, and creatures from the galaxy's darkest corners. None had ever made her doubt her strength. And yet, this one human, standing against her war beast and her own skill, was beginning to force that doubt into her mind. She hated the feeling. But somewhere beneath that hate was a spark of something else. Curiosity. The human's movements grew even sharper as the fight continued. Every swing of his blade carried purpose. Every block seemed to anticipate her next move. Zira adjusted her grip on the spear, narrowing her eyes at him. He was not simply enduring the battle. He was studying her, reading the rhythm of her attacks and the reactions of her beast. It was as if he had fought creatures like Cathor before, though she knew that no such beasts existed beyond Verelia's deadly landscapes. Cathor lunged again, jaws snapping like the closing gates of a fortress. The human ducked under the bite, rolling to the side with remarkable speed. He used Kathor's forward momentum against him, slicing at the tendons near the beast's leg joint. Kathor roared in pain, the sound shaking the ash from the air. The wound was not fatal, but it slowed him enough for the human to press forward. Zira's mind raced, searching for a way to break his momentum before it turned the tide completely. Her warriors were still locked in brutal combat with the other humans, and to her growing frustration, they were losing ground. The humans did not tire easily. They moved in unison, their lines shifting to protect the wounded and press into any opening they found. Every time her legion tried to separate them, they reformed without hesitation. It was a style of fighting she had never seen in alien forces before. They fought as though every life in their ranks mattered equally, and that made them dangerous. Zira signaled for the flamethrowers. The heavy weapons, mounted on the shoulders of armored beasts, began to spew gouts of liquid fire toward the human lines. The heat washed over the battlefield, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Yet even this did not scatter the humans. They dropped to the ground, shields locked overhead, letting the fire flow over them like a wave against stone. When the flames subsided, they rose as one and surged forward. It was a display of discipline that even she could not deny. The human facing her pressed his attack again. His strikes were not wild, but deliberate, each one aimed at the weakest points in Kathor's armor. Zira twisted in her saddle, using her spear to parry his blows, while directing Kathor's claws in rapid succession. For every strike she blocked, he found a way to force her into another defense. His persistence was unlike anything she had experienced. It was not fueled by rage or desperation. It was the quiet, unyielding strength of someone who had already accepted that retreat was not an option. Zira felt her connection to Kathor straining. The beast was furious, his every muscle tense with the effort of keeping up with the human speed. She knew that the longer the fight dragged on, the more it would favor her opponent. Kathor's immense power came with a cost. His bursts of strength could not last forever. But the human's endurance seemed limitless. He moved with the same precision and power now as he had at the start of the battle. It was a truth she could not ignore. She attempted a new tactic. As Kathor lunged, she leapt from his back, landing lightly on the ground between the human and her beast. Her spear flashed in the light of the burning battlefield as she advanced. She expected the human to hesitate, to be caught off guard by the sudden change. Instead, he met her head-on, his blade catching her spear in a clash that sent vibrations up her arm. The force behind his counterattack was enough to drive her back a step. She had underestimated his skill in close combat. The crowding battle around them seemed to fade again. It was just the two of them now, locked in a duel that carried the weight of the entire field. Her breath came faster, not from exhaustion, but from the sharp edge of focus the fight demanded. She could feel that he was holding nothing back, yet there was a strange restraint in his movements. He was not trying to kill her outright, he was testing her. And deep inside, Zira began to realize that the human was not here to simply survive this battle. He was here to prove something far greater. The clash between Zira and the human drew the attention of those still fighting nearby. Her warriors glanced toward their commander, perhaps expecting to see her overpower the stranger. Within moments, instead, they saw something that unsettled them. She was being matched, blow for blow, by someone they had mocked as weak before the battle began. The sound of steel striking steel echoed through the smoke, and neither side gave ground easily. Kathor circled them, wounded but still dangerous. His molten blood dripped onto the ground, burning small craters into the soil. The beast's golden eyes were locked on the human, but he did not rush in recklessly. It was as if even Kathor had learned that his opponent's speed could turn any careless move into a costly mistake. Zira could feel her beast's frustration through their bond, but she kept him at bay for now. This was a fight she needed to finish with her own hands. The human strikes carried weight that should have been impossible for his size. Every time their weapons met, Zira's arms tingled from the impact. He moved with the precision of a seasoned warrior, yet his style was unlike any combat form she had studied. It was raw and adaptable, shifting from aggressive offense to calculated defense in the blink of an eye. She found herself unable to predict him fully, and that was a rare experience for her. Around them, the larger battle raged on. The humans had pushed her forces back several paces, gaining control of ground they had never intended to hold. It was not about territory. It was about pressure, about forcing her warriors into positions where their usual advantages meant nothing. Each human seemed willing to risk injury if it meant protecting their allies, and that strange unity made them infuriatingly hard to break. Zira drove her spear forward in a sharp thrust, aiming for the gap beneath the human's arm. He twisted his body, letting the spear slide past, then countered with a strike that forced her to step back quickly. The sharp edge of his blade caught the light from a burning war machine nearby, and for a moment she saw the fire reflecting in his eyes. It was not the wild fire of rage, but the steady burn of determination. That look made her pulse quicken in a way she had not expected. Cathor growled low, sensing her momentary distraction. He stepped closer, smoke curling from his jaws. Zira could feel his impatience like a weight pressing against her thoughts. She gave him a subtle signal to hold back, but she knew she could not restrain him forever. The human noticed the beast's movement too, yet he did not retreat. He planted his feet firmly in the scorched dirt, raising his shield as if daring Cathor to strike again. The tension broke when Cathor lunged, forcing the human to split his focus between the beast and Zira's renewed attack. The battlefield shook under the impact of the beast's claws. The human moved with astonishing coordination, blocking Cathor's strike with his shield while deflecting Zira's spear in the same motion. It was an act of skill that should have been impossible under such pressure, and it made her realize that she was no longer simply trying to defeat him. She was trying to understand him. The human pushed forward, using the momentum from his block to drive Zira back several steps. She adjusted quickly, regaining her footing, but the shift in control was clear. He had found a rhythm that allowed him to hold both her and Cathor at bay. Her pride refused to accept this balance, yet part of her mind was already wondering how such strength could exist in someone the galaxy had dismissed as fragile. And deep within that thought, an unfamiliar feeling began to grow, a suspicion that this human might be far more than just an enemy to defeat. The human's endurance was becoming a problem Zira could no longer ignore. Minutes of intense combat had passed, yet his movements were still sharp and controlled. Most opponents she faced began to slow after the first few exchanges, but he seemed to fight as if the battle had only just started. She adjusted her stance, breathing steadily, determined not to show any sign of fatigue in return. Cathor circled again, his molten eyes narrowing as he studied the human's every move. The beast was bleeding from several deep cuts, but his spirit remained unbroken. The heat radiating from his body warped the air around him, and each heavy step sent vibrations through the ground. He was ready to attack, but he was also wary. Even a creature born for war could recognize an opponent capable of killing him if given the chance. The battle beyond their duel was shifting. Human forces had driven a wedge into the center of her lines, cutting off communication between some of her units. The sight made her grit her teeth. She had underestimated not only the warrior before her, but the discipline of his entire force. These humans fought with a strange blend of individual skill and collective precision, and that combination was eroding her army's advantage with alarming speed. Zira feinted a thrust with her spear, forcing the human to block high, then swung low in an attempt to sweep his legs. He jumped back just in time, the edge of her weapon grazing his armor. Before she could press forward, he countered with a sudden lunge, his blade slicing dangerously close to her arm. The cut was shallow, but it was the first time in years an enemy had landed a blow on her. Her pride burned hotter than the wound itself. Cathor reacted instantly, surging forward in a blast of heat and smoke. The human sidestepped and used the beast's momentum against him once again, striking at his flank. The sound of steel tearing through scale rang out across the battlefield. Cathor staggered, his roar shaking the ground, but he refused to fall. Zira felt his pain through their bond, and her connection to him pulsed with a fierce urge to retaliate. The human did not waste his advantage. He advanced with relentless pressure, forcing Zira to backpedal. His strikes were not wild, but each one carried the kind of force that demanded her full attention. She blocked one blow, parried another, then barely ducked under a third. Every movement felt like a test she could not afford to fail. For the first time, the idea of losing to him flickered in her mind. Determined to regain control, Zira whistled sharply, a command Cathor understood immediately. The beast roared and unleashed a stream of superheated breath toward the human. The air shimmered as the heat raced forward. Yet the human raised his shield and moved into the attack instead of away from it. The flames washed over him, and when they cleared, he was still standing. His armor was scorched, his shield glowing faintly from the heat, but his stance remained unshaken. Zira's eyes narrowed as she realized something she had not considered before. The human's strength was not solely physical. His resolve was an armor of its own, and it made him far more dangerous than any warlord she had faced. He was fighting not just to survive, but to send a message. And as she met his steady gaze across the space between them, she began to understand that the message was meant for her as much as for her army. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with heat and tension. Zira tightened her grip on the spear, her emerald skin glistening with both sweat and ash. Every sense told her this human was unlike any enemy she had faced before. His presence was sharp and unyielding, like a blade honed for a single purpose. Even Cathor seemed to hesitate, sensing something unnatural about the man's resolve. Human stepped forward slowly, his shield raised, his blade steady in his hand. He didn't rush, didn't lunge recklessly. His movements were deliberate, almost calm, as if he knew that the moment to strike would present itself without force. Zira mirrored his pacing, circling him while Cathor stalked from the opposite side. They were closing in on him from two directions, a tactic that had crushed countless warriors before. Yet this time, she felt no certainty of victory. Her warriors in the distance shouted in warning as the humans began pushing harder on the flanks. She could see that her forces were struggling to hold their lines, their formation beginning to buckle. The humans fought as though every small gain was a promise to protect one another. Their strength came not from fear of her, but from belief in themselves. That belief radiated from the warrior before her more than from any other on the battlefield. Cathor made the first move, slamming one massive claw down toward the human. The ground split open under the force, but the human rolled aside with perfect timing, coming up on one knee and striking at the beast's wrist. The blade sank into the gap between scales, drawing another spray of molten blood. The heat scorched the air, but the human didn't falter. His eyes never left Zira, even as Cathor howled in pain. Zira charged in that moment, her spear flashing toward his exposed side. He spun to meet her, his shield intercepting the strike with a sound like shattering stone. The impact rattled her arms, forcing her back a step. Before she could recover, he twisted and drove his blade upward toward her shoulder. She turned just in time to lessen the blow, but the tip still tore through part of her armor. The force behind it told her plainly, if she had been slower, the wound would have been far worse. The beast lunged again, this time with a burst of speed born from fury. The human ducked low, sliding under Cathor's body and slashing across his belly. The roar that followed shook the battlefield. Cathor staggered but remained standing, his eyes blazing with rage. Zira's bond with him pulsed with shared fury, but beneath it, she felt his growing exhaustion. The fight was draining them both, while the human strength seemed endless, determined to shift the tide. Zira barked a command in the old tongue, summoning a group of her elite guard. They rushed forward, surrounding the human with long blades and shields. For a moment, she thought sheer numbers would overwhelm him. But instead, he moved with frightening efficiency, using their close proximity. Against them, each parry flowed into a counterstrike, each sidestep into a perfectly placed blow. Her guards fell back one by one, unable to match his speed or precision. Zira realized she was witnessing something more than skill. This was a will that refused to break, a fire that no amount of pressure could smother. She felt a strange pull in her chest, not of fear, but of reluctant admiration. This human was proving something to her, though she did not yet understand why it mattered so much. And as the smoke swirled around them and the shouts of battle filled the air, she knew, with absolute certainty, that their fight was far from finished. The sun was beginning to sink behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The orange glow reflected off scorched armor and shattered weapons, painting the scene in hues of fire and blood. Zira's breathing was steady, but deep, her muscles taut from the constant exchange of blows. Across from her, the human stood with the same unshaken stance, his eyes locked on her as if nothing else in the world existed. Cathor limped to her side, his wounds deep but his spirit still fierce. The molten cracks along his scales glowed, brighter in the dimming light, casting a halo of heat around them both. Zira could feel his heartbeat through the bond they shared, heavy and uneven, yet still defiant. The human strikes had taken their toll, but Cathor refused to yield. That refusal mirrored her own resolve, though the human's endurance gnawed at the edges of her certainty. Around them, the tide of the battle was shifting more clearly in the human's favor. Her warriors had been pushed back toward the ridges, their formation scattered. The human soldiers fought with precision even in chaos, closing gaps and pulling back the wounded without breaking their lines. It was not just discipline. It was loyalty, and it was the kind of loyalty that could not be forced. Zira found herself wondering if that was the true strength that made their kind so dangerous. The human began to advance again, his steps slow and deliberate. The sound of metal scraping against stone marked each shift of his boots. Cathor snarled low, moving to intercept, but Zira placed a hand on his flank. She wanted this fight to end on her terms, and something deep inside told her the moment they were walking toward would define more than just the outcome of the battle. It might define her view of his entire species. When he struck, it was with a sudden burst of speed. The blade arced toward her in a flash of steel, forcing her to drop into a low guard. Sparks flew as their weapons met, and she felt the jolt travel up her arms. She countered immediately, spinning her spear in a wide sweep aimed at his legs. He jumped back just enough to evade it, then lunged again, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. The rhythm of their duel quickened, neither willing to be the first to step away. Cathor, unable to hold back, charged forward in a desperate attempt to crush him. The human pivoted on one foot, guiding the beast's momentum past him before striking at the wound on Cathor's side. The roar that followed shook the air like a thunderclap. Zira's pulse quickened with the beast's pain, but her focus never left the human. His precision was relentless, his awareness unshakable, even with the beast and herself pressing from both sides. He moved as if every strike had been calculated before the battle even began. She saw her opening when he overextended on a block. Her spear darted forward, grazing his shoulder and tearing through a strap of his armor. The piece fell to the ground, revealing a glimpse of the skin beneath. She had expected to see weakness there, but instead saw hardened muscle marked with the scars of old battles. Each scar was a story, and each one told her that this was no ordinary soldier. He had fought before and survived where others would have fallen. Their eyes met again in that brief pause. The world around them seemed to blur, the sounds of war fading to a distant hum. Zira felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, one that had nothing to do with strategy or pride. She realized that she wanted to know why he fought the way he did, why his will refused to break, and why his presence unsettled her more than any weapon ever could. In that moment, she understood that the outcome of their next exchange would not just decide the battle. It would decide the truth she would carry about humans for the rest of her life. The sky above the battlefield burned with streaks of fire. As the final clash drew near, smoke curled upward in dark spirals, and the air shimmered with heat from the flames that still licked at shattered war machines. Zira's grip on her spear was steady, but her thoughts were sharper than the weapon. In her hands, she could feel the moment arriving when one final strike would determine everything. Cathor's breathing was ragged now, each exhale releasing a hiss of molten vapor. His massive form still loomed beside her, but the power in his movements had slowed. The human stood opposite them, his armor battered, his shield dented, his blade nicked from countless impacts. Yet he still stood tall, his stance solid, his eyes locked on hers with the same unbroken will that had carried him through the entire battle. Around them, the larger fight was nearing its end. Her warriors, once so confident, were being pushed back toward the ridges by the relentless human forces. The sounds of clashing steel and battle cries were beginning to fade, replaced by the heavy rhythm of boots moving forward. The humans were winning, but victory here would be decided by the duel still unfolding at the center of the field. The human moved first, closing the distance with a sudden rush. Zira met him head-on, their weapons colliding in a spark of light and sound. Each strike came faster than the last, the tempo of their fight rising like the pounding of a war drum. She could feel his strength pressing against hers, each impact testing the limits of her endurance. Neither of them slowed, neither gave the other room to breathe. Cathor lunged into the fray, his claws sweeping low in an attempt to crush the human's legs. The man spun aside, deflecting Zira's thrust while driving his blade into the beast's shoulder. The roar that followed was deafening, and the force of it rippled across the battlefield. Zira's bond with her beast flared, with pain and fury, but she did not falter. She pressed her attack, determined to end this here and now. The human countered with a shield bash that sent her stumbling back a step. In that instant, she understood his plan. He had been drawing her in, forcing her to commit to moves he could turn against her. She reset her stance quickly, circling him once more. Her pride demanded that she not be the one to fall first, but she could no longer deny that he had earned her respect through sheer will and skill. Their weapons locked again, this time neither pushing nor yielding. For a moment they stood face to face, the heat from Cathor's body mixing with the smoke between them. Zira could see every detail in the human's eye, scars of hardship, memories of battles long past, and an unshakable purpose. She realized then that this was not just a fight for survival. It was a statement, a truth about humans that the galaxy had ignored for too long. Zira stepped back, lowering her weapon slightly. Around them, the battle slowed as warriors from both sides turned to watch. The human did not press the advantage. Instead, he gave a single nod, a gesture that carried the weight of mutual recognition. She returned it without a word. The war. Beast behind her rumbled softly, sensing the change. In that moment, Zira knew she would speak of this day for the rest of her life, not as a defeat, but as the moment she understood what made humans truly dangerous.